So, hello all, great to be here in Malmö. My first time actually to be here, so nice to see you all in a physical togetherness. Thank you, Rafaela, for the warm introduction. So I'm representing BLab, and I'm also going to talk about systems change, but then from a business perspective, and hope to provide a little bit of a hopeful outlook on how business can help transforming our current system into a more regenerative one. So what about BLab? BLab is that not-for-profit organization. We work across the globe, and we work on creating that more inclusive, equitable, and regenerative society and economic system that actually helps people and planet, as we have now also heard from our former speakers. I wanted to just check in with you a bit about your knowledge. Who of you has ever heard about B-corp? Well, it's good that I'm here, actually. I would say about maybe 10 to 15%. Well, B-corp is our key or core product that we provide as BLab, which means it's a certification process for companies who really want to start working and improving themselves on their societal and environmental impact. So let me first start with a short film.
Throughout history, humankind has created a multitude of different economic and social systems. And while systems are complex, the truth is they were built by people, so they can be changed by people. We can transform from profiting only the few to benefiting all. From extraction to regeneration, and from individualism to interdependence. It is not an unreachable ideal. It is the reality that we, the B-Corp movement, are already building. Together, we're transforming the global economy to benefit all people, communities, and the planet. Together, we'll realise our vision of an inclusive, equitable, and regenerative world. Join the movement.
So B-Corp, our main product, and we actually currently have over 5,500 companies that have undergone our certification process, from which 850 or somewhat around that number in Europe, and just about 70 in the Nordics, which I find actually a rather low amount of companies who have engaged with us. Over 43 million people actually work for a B-Corp, just to give an idea. And here in Sweden, I think we now have 8 B-Corps, and a few more are coming up in the next couple of months. Maybe you know some of them, the Terrible Twins, the Summa Equity, an equity investor, one of the first listed Nordic companies called Urbit, and also Scandinavisk, for example, a beauty company. They are all B-Corp. But also some of the other brands like Tony Chocolonely, Rituals, Chiesi, they have their headquarters within the Nordics here in Sweden, so you might know those brands. But let me just first explain what it actually is to become a B-Corp. First and foremost, B-Corp, as I said, we're part of the movement of business that really want to use business as a force for good. So really change the way they run and operate in business. And that starts by using an assessment tool. We call that the B-Impact Assessment Tool, which is a free-of-charge tool. Everyone can use it. It starts to really measure what matters and to give you an insight on your performance on both the societal but also the social and the environmental impact you have as a company. If you reach about 80 points doing that assessment, you can really voluntarily decide to go into the certification process, which will give you a lot more insight, and it's a rigorous process that looks into your entire business model. But also you have to change your legal statute. So that means that you have to put your purpose into your really company DNA by putting that into your legal bylaw. And the last step of becoming a B-Corp is actually that you sign our Declaration of Interdependence. I will talk a little bit more about that. So this can be actually considered an intensive process. Also, if you look at the B-Corp certificates only lasting for 3 years. So after this, you have to do some of these steps again, which will engage and encourage you to go into a journey that will continuously improve your performance. So this about the B Corp certificates and about 200,000 users that are currently already using that B impact assessment. But where and why did it actually start? Well, in the US, the three founders of the B Corp movement, Jay Gilbert, Bart Houlihan, and Andrew Kassoy, actually were entrepreneurs. They had their own footwear and apparel company in which they really built in those societal and social values on how they treated, for example, their workers, their employees, and so on. When they, after a while, sold their company, they saw that just after a few months, none of those values were actually continued in the business model anymore. So at that time, they realized that a business model can change very sudden, specifically when the new owners will have the shareholder perspective on the core of their focus. So they were realizing, okay, we need to find a way to change business in a way that it can be an example for other business and that we can have that ripple effect. And that was actually the start of BLab and the B Corp movement. But what are we here to change? Well, from the start, BLab actually seeks to make interventions that create change on 3 levels. First of all, change the behavior of business by helping them with our assessment, with our tools, to look into their own performance and to try to set up that continuous improvement. Secondly, we want to change the way the cultural expectations and the norms that are being used, and to create really a narrative shift and a paradigm shift. We want to actually set up maybe a new norm for how business is successful. And thirdly, we advocate often with partners for new regulations or, for example, a compulsory stakeholder governance model in the EU directives. And that ultimately should lead, of course, to creating that inclusive, equitable, and regenerative system. But as I mentioned, on the core of our movement is actually this declaration of interdependence. And that connects also fully to what a few of the former speakers already mentioned, that we are here in one system. Business is part of that. We are humans. Humans lead business. We are all part of that system. And that's where we see we have we are really interconnected, and we should also act with that in mind. So when you and your company can become a B Corp, you sign this declaration, which will mean that you will also act with that in mind when you operate into your business. And maybe you think, yeah, well, that sounds all great. These are words on paper. So what is actually the value of running into this B Corp certification process? Well, I could draw up some numbers around B Corps jointly, for example, saving water, saving carbon emissions, and so on. But I want to focus here on the more intrinsic aspect of being part of that movement and really choose to become a force for good. So, first of all, the B Corps all transparently show their ambitions on societal and environmental impact, and they report on that and take that continuous improvement perspective. They also look into how to develop really impactful business models in which they outperform in these sectors. And then they also want to compete to be best for the world instead of best in the world. So that is also something that we see across those entrepreneurs. And also, of course, some B Corps will mention that there is more brand relevance or even brand value after becoming a B Corp. However, that should be not the purpose at the end of mind, but it should be maybe also a good way to prove that it has value. So if you look then, I took one example to talk a little bit about, okay, and what is then the perspective of a single company when it has undergone the certification process and when it has taken up that journey. Well, Rituals, it's also in Sweden. I think you might all know it. It's a really big or fast-growing, I would say, company in the beauty industry. They have about 7,000 employees, 870 stores, and they actually already built their business model around ancient wisdom and put that at the core of their products. So when they were looking into how to improve their sustainability ambitions, they were looking into all kinds of certifications, all kinds of methodologies. Also, investors were asking them to show how they would prove their sustainability promises to customers, for example. And at that time, Rituals actually said, well, B-corp, the B-corp certificate, is the only assessment that covers really a holistic part of our company, so all the various aspects. And after they certified, they came back to us with this sort of quote that I mentioned here, in which they say, okay, it helped to get them started, it helped to get them measure and to focus and to measure what matters, and it also helped them to make really difficult choices. And finally, it became a means to go into that continuous improvement that I mentioned before, to set the targets, to improve the performance, and to go into that again. So that is just a perspective of one single example, but I think some of these are really general feedbacks that we receive. Just a few other points that I wanted to make before I conclude, because the B Corp movement is not only working with business, we also look into partnering with other organizations, for example, on the climate, B Corp Climate Collective, where we unite companies that want to raise their net zero ambitions, for example. And also our work in the Interdependence Coalition, as I said, is focusing on changing the rules of the game. So really putting stakeholders' perspective into the EU policies. But also from a business perspective, there can be a good match which is also commercially interesting. To give you a few examples, for example, the Beauty Coalition, which is actually chaired by Scandinavisk, the CEO of Scandinavisk, and it shows that how within a whole industry, joining forces can really raise the bar and set a new example. But also, for example, Tony Chocolonely, who announced last week that Ben & Jerry's is now going to source from their open-chain choco plants, which will increase, of course, their impact on the slave-free chocolate. And the last one I wanted to mention is the open hiring procedure. It's a very interesting example of Greystone Bakeries. It's an American company where they use a very new, innovative way of hiring people without any screening, without any knowledge on the background, sex or whatsoever. And they come up with that model into our community where they share that with, for example, a bigger company like Bonduelle, who's now copying that model. So this is just to give you an example of how becoming part of such a movement and find your fellow B Corps or fellow business leaders can really strengthen also your own impact. So to conclude, I actually want to mention a few things. I think we have had the great former speakers, Victor and Carol, explaining the urgency. That is no need to repeat. So I want to actually ask you to maybe also start today, where you, if you don't have started yet, and start measuring. Just start measuring what matters. Create, for example, that impact assessment account and just get going. It's just free of charge. And as we all know here together, and I also heard there was some child in the room, we really need to keep in mind that it's not just about us, it's also about the generations to come. Thank you.